Hello again. Welcome to episode 2 of Mocked. I'm so happy you're here. First off, I just want to start this episode off by saying thank you so much to everyone who tuned into episode 1. The amount of support that I've received is overwhelmingly positive, and I can't thank you enough. Without the people who tune in, this really wouldn't be possible. So thank you so much. It really does make all of this worthwhile to know that people relate or even just support my message and the things I'm trying to get across with this project of mine. So I cannot thank you enough, and I am so happy that you are here. Today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the version of me that survived the chaos. Last episode, I talked a lot about a lot of different things, and today I really just wanted to hone in and focus on one focal point, and that is the version of myself that survived. I feel like when we are in a time of fight or flight or survival mode, it's really easy to become a version of yourself out of necessity, out of I'm just doing this to survive, if that makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about the version of me that I became out of necessity, not out of character. These past 3-4 years have been some of the hardest of my life. And although I wouldn't take those years back by any means, there's a lot that I went through, and it left me questioning for a long time, kind of this question of why me? Why me? Why would this happen to me? And I want to touch on that a little bit, because why anybody, Why do healthy people get sick? Why do good people die in war? Why anybody? That's the question. The more you sit and you question, why me? Why does this happen to me? The closer to insanity you will get, because why anybody? It's a question that can really make you spiral when you can honestly just learn to accept and grow and learn from mistakes or tragedies or chaos. You can learn from those things instead of asking this empty question of why me, where there is really no answer. There's no explanation that can be had as to why good things happen to bad people. And the point that I'm trying to get across when I say all of this is because of the things that we go through, we become versions of ourselves. And this is going back to what I was talking about before I kind of went on that why me tangent. The version of myself that I became when I was asking this question of why me, it was almost unrecognizable. I was jumping into all these really unhealthy habits and doing all of these impulsive things that current me can't even imagine doing, right? And it took a lot to outgrow this version of myself that I didn't recognize, because I was just trying to stay alive, right? I was just trying to get by. With everything that I was going through, I was just trying to figure out me and keep my head above water, when I didn't even realize that the version that I had digressed into was somebody I didn't even know. And I feel like that's where we can get lost, and it can be hard to outgrow this version of yourself that you became solely out of survival, To deal with everything that you're going through on a day-to-day, you become this version of self-defense and walls up, guard up, just to protect yourself. It doesn't make it wrong. It just, I personally don't think that life has to be like that. I think that it can be vulnerable and open and honest, and it doesn't have to be, this facade of superficialness just to get by, You can be your full authentic self and not only survive, but live, And I think that when we get caught up in this mindset of survival instinct, we forget that it is okay to be vulnerable and open and honest and truthful and kind, It takes a lot to outgrow that version of ourselves that we solely build just for survival. And I want to touch on that, how hard it is to outgrow a version of yourself based and made for survival. So I almost want to call it your survival self, right? We'll call that version of ourselves survival self. So when you are adapting to all of these aspects of life, you're maneuvering in and out of life, trying to figure out your 20s, your teens, your 30s, your 40s, whatever. I want to touch on how adaptation to life can turn into identity. So say you go through a breakup. To put this into perspective, you don't understand how to handle all these emotions, and you go off and you socialize, you party, you're drinking to cope with it, you meet other people, you engage in impulsive sexual activity, and all of a sudden you take a step back, right? You take a step back and you look at yourself in the mirror and you realize, holy crap, not only do I not recognize this person, and not that it matters, but the person that I was with wouldn't either. Not that that matters in the long run, but I'm just saying through what you go through in life shapes different versions of yourself. And in my opinion, you get to choose which one sticks as your identity or who you really resonate with, And these different versions of yourself can either shape who you are and build a strong foundation of bravery and courage and resilience, or it can turn into impulsivity, bad behavior, substance abuse. It's all up to you. And I feel like we forget that sometimes our brain is our own, because your brain, it's so easy to let your brain take control of you because it's easy, especially with overthinking or anxiety or nervousness or fear. It's so easy to just let that take over and let it engulf our mind. But if we put in a little bit of work, you can go, you know what? No, I'm not going to let this engulf me. I'm going to use it as redirection, And I'm not saying that's easy. I am not saying that is easy. That is not what I am saying. That's why I said you got to put in a little bit of work, It's tough and it's hard and it sucks at times, but how bad do you want your identity to be something that's built on a solid foundation, It's how bad you want it, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to feel what you need to feel or experience what you need to go through. It doesn't mean any of that, but it does mean that once you are understanding what you are going through emotionally and mentally, you then get to pivot and decide which direction you go in, because it's your mind. But then again, when we do kind of submit to these versions of ourselves that we don't recognize because we're adapting to what we know as survival, it's hard to outgrow them because they're comfortable and it's a way of coping. Becoming these versions of ourselves that we're not necessarily the proudest of is our way of coping, dealing with things, dealing with emotion. I, of all people, know that especially, and it doesn't last forever. That method of coping turns into dangerous habits, and they don't last forever. They just don't. So I think that the cost of digressing into unhealthy versions of yourself is and can be extremely detrimental. Once you realize that you are unrecognizable, or this version of yourself is unrecognizable, you take a step back and you're like, I don't know this person. Who is that? That is extremely emotionally challenging, because then you have to take a step back and go, how do I rebuild myself? And that question in itself is incredibly hard to navigate, you don't recognize yourself. How do you build on something you don't recognize? You know what I mean? It takes a toll on you to submit to the unhealthy coping mechanisms and the unrecognizable version of yourself. It takes a toll on you. It absolutely does. And I know that when I was really struggling and I didn't recognize myself, it was like I hit a brick wall when I finally realized how bad things had gotten. I needed to fix it right away. And the cost for me wasn't, necessarily a bad cost. It was just, I need help now. And that cost me, my time, my energy to go get help. And not that it wasn't needed or wasn't absolutely needed, because it was. But in order to outgrow that version of yourself, it comes at a cost. And that is time and patience with yourself to relearn who you are, if that makes sense. So when I started getting help, right, to try to diminish this version of myself that I hated, there was this like pivotal moment where I knew I needed to change. When I went and got help for my circumstances that were going on in my life, I was aware I needed help, so I went and got it, right? During treatment, it really wasn't that bad. I feel like people look at treatment or rehab and they think solitary confinement, they think like insane asylum type of thing. That is not what it was at all. When I was getting treatment, I learned more coping skills in those 3 weeks than I learned in my entire life. I was aware that things were changing because I was changing them. And it feels so good. When you are actively changing the trajectory of your life for the better, it feels so good. But I want to talk about something that I feel like not a lot of people talk about when they go away to treatment. When you are constantly trying to relearn yourself and grow and reshape who you are, it can get tiring, man. I mean, I was in treatment for about 3 months, and towards the end, I was just burnt out. I feel like, nobody really talks about how tiring it is to relearn yourself. And I touched a little bit on this in episode 1, but it is so tiring to get the help that you need sometimes. I mean, I was in treatment. I was in group therapy sessions from 8 a.m. to 6:30, 7 days a week for 3 weeks. And then I went away to a different facility, and it was a little bit different, but I just felt so tired all the time. And I think that is the point where it is most important to continue on and to keep going. Not necessarily with intensive treatment, but just like to continue to move through it and move through the burnout and move through the tiredness to really achieve where you need to be in order to be successful. And that's what I did. I got out of treatment, and it was hard at first. I mean, there's so many things that they prepare you for in treatment when you go back into society. And then there are a few things that they kind of didn't prepare me for. And that is when you take all of the skills that you learned and you apply them to your everyday life. So yeah, I don't know. And that leads me kind of to where I'm at now. Would I say I'm fully healed? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm just honest. I'm not fully healed. I have so much more room and time to grow. And I feel like people think that I thought this when I went away to treatment. I thought it was going to be 3 weeks. I was done. I was ready to go back into the real world. And that is just not how it goes. You take what you learn and you establish it in your real life so that you don't regress back into that version of yourself that you don't recognize. And I think there is such beauty in being honest about where you are at within your healing journey. And when people will ask me, like, do you think you're healed from everything you've gone through? No, absolutely not. I don't think I'll ever be fully healed, but it gets easier. It gets easier to continue to live, right? And when I got out of treatment, I had this expectation for myself that I had to be perfect. I couldn't mess up. I couldn't fumble my recovery journey. One thing that I know for sure, growth is not linear. Growth is not linear. Recovery is not linear. I was so scared when I got out of treatment that people were going to expect me to be perfect because I held that own expectation for myself. And I have since learned that if you are on a road to recovery or growth, it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows, and that is okay. That is okay. It's how you deal with the rain that comes to get to the sunshine and rainbows, It's how you adapt. It's how you pivot, And it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you can't mess up every once in a while. It doesn't mean that you're not unapologetically, authentically you. And I think that is what is so special about growth. That throughout the entire thing, you are unapologetically, authentically you. And I think there's something very, very beautiful in that. So, yeah, guys, that's episode 2 for you. I am so happy happy to be here, like I've said numerous times. But if there's one thing that I can leave you with on this episode, it is to be kind to yourself, even when outgrowing the versions of you that you do not recognize. The kinder you are to you, the better off you'll be. There's only one you, so treat her well. Anyways, with that, thank you for listening. I'm so happy you're here, and stay tuned for episode 3. Bye. Ooh.